Well, welcome and welcome to a brand new day filled with God's glory and God's grace. It was a bit misty this morning, but the sun is out. Yay. I think I have got a shirt for it. As we start our day, as we start our conference, I want to thank you for making it here. Why don't you give the person next to you a hand of welcome? Say, you made it. Yes. Thanks for coming. Welcome. We are gathered here as one people called by God and entrusted with the mission, with the commission of bringing the good news to the people in our community. And I think it is such an exciting opportunity that we have been privileged and called to bring the good news. Good news to the people. And so today we are here under the feet of our Savior, our Creator, and our Teacher. And we are asking God to teach us and give us this teachable spirit, so that we are able to live here and let the world know of God's glory. The world is so much dying for this good news. And so it's a privilege that we share this duty, we share this task together, empowered by the Holy Spirit. So let us focus on a scripture that reminds us of this powerful call to action from Jesus himself. Mark 16:15, and he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation. And as I look at how we are sat here, I just imagine the disciples of Jesus huddled together in a room after the crucifixion, but also the resurrection of Jesus. Out of this world experience for them. And it was in this scene that he appeared to them, and not just to comfort them, but also to commission them. Go into the world, he declares. And this command, this great commission, given generations ago, has now fallen to us. And the good thing is that it's not a commission, it's not a call for pastors or missionaries or ministers alone. It is for every believer. And it is also a call. God calling us to step beyond our comfort zones and bring the gospel to a world in need. And the good thing is that sharing this good news doesn't need a theological degree. It doesn't. All it needs is your story. What is your story of how Christ has changed you, of how Christ has been gracious to you? It is all about your story of encounter with Jesus. How Jesus changed your life. And we don't need all the answers. We just need to point to the one who is the answer. And we also don't need to be flawless. Just be available. Letting God use your ordinary life for extraordinary purposes and in extraordinary ways. And so today, tomorrow, next week, next year, always be reminded that you have been called, you have been commissioned, but you also carry a light of the world within you. So let it shine. Amen. We will continue with the hymn. Shall we pray? Our heart overflows with gratitude for your grace. A gift so generous and undeserved, and we stand in awe of your plan to save the world through us, to bless our communities through us. This morning we are here and we say, Lord, speak, for we are ready to listen. Amen. Amen.
Okay, now we have a guest speaker, who's Norman Smith, who's the Presbytery Clerk of Lothian Borders Presbytery.
Good morning. Good morning. Is that on? Yeah, that's it. Good morning, that's better. It's good to be with you. I've got a topic of taking you through the 5 marks of mission in about 38 minutes, I think. So, I'm not, you'll be pleased to know, going to give you a theological treatise on the 5 marks of mission, because you can go and look all that up. What I want to do is I want to take you through a journey of the context in which we practice mission, and I'm going to tell you things that you know, but you may not realise, if we can put it that way. And so, I want to start off by, here we are, let's go to the next one. Alright, here we are. So, you will have noticed in our churches that the number of funerals has decreased. You will have noticed that the number of baptisms have decreased, and also that the number of weddings have decreased. Initially, Kwame, you'll go through a backlog of all the ones that were waiting, and then you'll notice that they're not what they were, and it's because we're now on the 4th or 5th generation of unchurched people in our country. And it's quite scary. And I'll show you what happened when we go to the next slide. Here it is. Typically in the 1960s. Now, how many of you were around in the 60s? Oh, 1 or 2. Okay, that's good. Right. Do you remember that churches were full?
Yes.
Yes, churches were full. And the struggle wasn't, do we have kids, but what do we do with all the kids? Because everybody came to church. In those days as well, it was quite interesting because the youth group was also the matchmaking dating agency of the church. Yes. So how many of you met your intended through the youth group? 1 or 2? You see, that happened, right? In the 1970s, there were still, for some churches, hundreds in the Sunday school. My previous church in Granton, they used to boast that they used to hire a train, and the train would take the 300 kids to go to Sunday school. But something happened in the 70s, and what happened is adults often chose not to go to church, but they sent their kids to church. So you would find, and you would find the adults suffering a kind of church shame thing, where they would drive up to the church in the car, they wouldn't even get out of the car, and they'd kind of go to the kids, right, off you go. And the kids went into church. Does that ring a bell? And what happened actually was that the kids learned that church is not for adults. They learned that church is actually for kids. And so when these kids grew up into the 80s, they actually stopped sending their own kids to church. Because they were saying to themselves, I'm not going to put my kids through what I had to go through, where mum and dad didn't even come to church with me. But they kicked me out and went shopping or went to the football or something like that. And it was in the 1980s that actual numerical collapse really happened in our churches. And then when you kind of move forward in 2000s and 2010s, what happened in 2010 is you would hear the phrase, we used to have kids. You ever use that phrase? We used to have kids in our church? And many churches, when you get into the 220s, don't say we used to have kids. What they say is, we used to have adults. And church attendance really shrank. So what you're seeing there is the typical shape of what happened to a typical established church. That's not just the Church of Scotland. It also sits for all the churches across the land, kind of what they've typically gone through. And when we look slightly in more detail at some of these decades, it's quite interesting. So this is good housekeeping from the 1960s. I want you to tell me, now where's the best place? Because I'm trying so that you all can get to see. All right, okay. Can you see? No, I'll go over here. Is that okay for the Mevo? Yeah, that's fine. All right. Tell me what you see. What do you see and what do you not see in that? It's not a trick question. This is like catchphrase. Say what you see. What do you see?
Lots of women.
Not a single man in that. Could you imagine that nowadays? You just couldn't imagine that nowadays. But what happened in the 60s was, and this was typically the thing where men went to work and the women stayed at home and raised the kids. And also, people retired, and my generation can only dream of this. How many of you got to retire in your 50s? I really don't like you. How many of you got to retire in your early 60s? Right. For my generation, I'm probably looking at 68 for retirement. And what that means, you see, is the early retires are not around to run the church. Because by the time people retire now, they are really tired. Right? And they don't necessarily want to take on all of these roles. So this was the 60s. What happened in the 70s? Things changed in the 70s. Here we are. Employment patterns changed. Now, I drove here. What did I call it? It was Riverside. So today coming here, I didn't come through the main Selkirk, I came down by Riverside. And I was taken with the number of abandoned mills. There's literally a street of abandoned mills. And if I was a young person in Selkirk, I would be exploring through them every weekend. I don't know the kids do that, probably get around. Right? But in the 70s, what happened is jobs for life disappeared. If you think through Selkirk, how many people inherited the tools of their father when they went to work? And that just went. You can't see it, but the name of the board is freedom. Right? Is this going to ring in bells with you? Right? And when you get to today, the employment patterns today are actually really interesting. So here's the one for today. Let's go on to the next one. Right? From having a job for life, in the UK today, there are 1.3 million people on what's called a 0 hours contract. Do you know what a 0 hours contract is? Right. The very opposite. Can you imagine every day waiting for a phone call to see if you're going to have work? We've gone from a time of absolute stability to absolute instability. Now, I grew up watching things called the Carry On films, right? And there was one Carry On film that was based around the toilet factory, if you remember that one. And they were constantly going on strike. But the thing that struck me about it was they didn't just work there. When they went on holiday, they all went on the works outing on their holiday. And off they went like some Trinians on a bus. But now that has all changed. And the rising pension age has changed. And the world that we inhabit today, that we operate in our churches today, is so vastly different to the world that we used to inhabit. And frankly, the world that we were comfortable with. Because we liked that world of stability. And it's not there. Right, here's the next one, because we've got a few of these. We used to live geographically. So that's the Selkirk High Street, isn't it? I think it is. It should be when I googled it. Right? People used to live within just a few miles of their house. So you wouldn't necessarily travel far to the shops. Where was the post office? Post office was there. Where was the doctor's surgery? It was there. Where were your family? Your family were a few doors down. And we were like that. We lived geographically. And one of the ways that is demonstrated, so close your eyes for a second and think about the church that you grew up in. I want to ask you a question. How big was the vestibule in the church that you grew up in? How big? I don't know. You tell me.
Huge.
The vestibule, was it big or wee? Typically, it was tiny. Now, I'm talking literally here. When you walk in the front door, how big is the first space that you come into in that church? And typically, it was tiny. Because what you did was, you went in, you hung up your jacket, and then you walked in. And I don't know if any of you know, can you work out why the space was tiny? That's right, you knew everyone. You met them at the post office, you met them at the shop, you met them at various activities throughout the week. You were physically in that space, so you didn't need to make space to meet people. And if you walk into a modern style church, the first thing you walk through now is not the vestibule, it's the fellowship hall. It's the place where we have tea and coffee, because we don't meet people through the week. Here's a question. As you look around this room, how many people have you met this week between Monday and Friday before today? See? Yeah. See how different it is now. And you're ingrained in the church, so it's likely that you met one or two others. But that's not, we don't live physical, geographical based lives anymore. If you go on a day out from here, where's your day out typically? Would you go down to Berwick? Might you say, I'm going for a long day out to Newcastle? Right? Would you go to Edinburgh on a day out? Right. Well, you see, that's a generation ago you'd go to Edinburgh on holiday. That's the thing. It's very different. And when things began to change, people began to connect in ways that were not based around their physical geography. And the first one of these, believe it or not, was Friends Reunited. Does anyone remember Friends Reunited? Right? It's where you connected with your old school chums. The number of marriages that broke up because people were connecting with what they remembered as their old flame. Right? We won't go into that, we're a church. Right? And then that was followed, before Facebook, by something called Bebo. And you're going, what on earth is Bebo? Bebo was huge. It was the Facebook before Facebook. And it was sold for billions of dollars, and now you're like going, what's Bebo? Right? And then eBay came in. eBay was around before Amazon, believe it or not. And what you've got now is, you've got the beginning where people, yes, we're still living slightly geographically based, but now we're beginning to move further afield. And our horizons are moving further afield. And we're connecting with people really across a wide range of places. Now, I mean, I haven't put it up there, but the other thing you can do now is direct dial. Hands up if you've got family in America or Australia or somewhere like that. How often do you phone them? Well, let me ask you a question. When's the last time you sent them a telegram? And when you phone them, do you phone the operator first? You don't. Of course you don't. You can phone someone's mobile across the world. It's an amazing world that we live in now. So we're moving away from the geographic-based living. And the next stage of this was actually things like Facebook, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Amazon, and YouTube, where we think nothing of connecting with people around the world. There's that whole thing, isn't there, of what they call the 6 degrees of separation, where we are connected with people. It's staggering. And what this means, and Kwame, this is really scary for you. You see, when we were living geographically, to get a really busy church, you didn't have to have a really great church. You just had to have a better church than your neighbours. Right? But now, because we live in this connected world, it means that your church is being actually compared to every other church in cyberspace. You got it nailed. It's fine. You got it nailed. Right? But you think about it, if somebody doesn't like church now, they can just go onto YouTube, right? And they can see church anywhere. I was chatting to someone just yesterday, and they were hitting me with a whole pile of names. They're saying, do you follow this person on YouTube? Oh, that person's really good on YouTube to follow. And all that kind of stuff. It's a really different way of life now. And as you come down the younger generations, you were just talking about this, you know, Facebook is an old person's social media. Right? Your kids and grandkids would not be seen dead on Facebook. Right? It's just, we're not going to do that. And even Snapchat, I need to update this, it's TikTok now, and things like that. It's kind of scary. And you know that YouTube now, here's something just to illustrate this, that well-known impartial commentator, Piers Morgan, has moved his shows to YouTube. He's ditched terrestrial TV and he's moved to YouTube. And so we are moving from this geographic-based lifestyle that we all grew up with to this much wider lifestyle. I have a niece, and the niece is 4, and 3 or 4 times a week she goes to the front door of the house and she meets the man. Can you think of who is called the man? This is a 4-year-old, and she's got this person identified as the man. Any ideas?
Delivery man.
Yes, it's the Amazon delivery man. Right? You think about it, you get that notification, the delivery man is 7 stops away. And he literally can be in the next street. And between the next street and your street, there's 7 stops. It's quite astounding, isn't it? We live so differently. So, we know this, but often we don't realise this. All the stuff that I'm kind of laying out for you here. So what does all this mean? Here we go. Oh no, there's another couple I have to say as well. The learning style today is different. Right? How many of you grew up in school? How many went to school? Come on, you all went to school. How many of you got the strap for speaking? All right. Okay? Right. When you went to church, church mirrored school. Because the learning style in church was, I speak, you listen. Okay? And see that lovely picture of that? That's got to be a Church of Scotland minister. He looks like he's going to have a stroke, doesn't he? And there's 3 or 4 people sitting down there in big coats and hats. You can tell it's a Church of Scotland, it's a cold church. Right? And was that not the case? That the minister did all the work, and you turned up on Sunday, and you were expected, you might still be expected, to sit down quietly and not to say a word. If somebody came along to your parish church and they were speaking during the sermon, what would you do? Yeah, that's right. You would, even now you would. But the learning styles is interesting. The learning styles have changed. So actually, let's go on. We're now at something called Curriculum for Excellence. So any teachers in here? There we go, you'll know this, right? Okay, we used to be on something called 5 to 14. We're now on Curriculum for Excellence. And am I right in saying that Curriculum for Excellence is not about giving people the answers? It is about giving them the tools to find the answers for themselves. Is that right? You see the difference? It's not telling them this is it, but it's telling them this is the tool that you can go and find out the answer for yourself. How does that equate to the way that we do church? In church, we tend to turn up and we tell people, this is the answer, you must do this. But actually, churches, as society has gone on, society has gone this way, church has gone this way, we are more and more out of step with the younger generations. There was a church and they had what's called a frontline youth worker, which meant the youth worker was doing youth work out and about. And they managed to get the community kids to come to the church. And they had a balcony, and this Sunday, all the community kids, I'm not telling you where this was, they all sat up on the balcony. Now, do you say, welcome to church, hello? And how will you give back? No. Not these kids. They were on the balcony, they were going, yo, good to see you! This kind of stuff, right? And what do you think the reaction of the church was? Exactly. Who are these aliens in our church? But I've got to tell you this, the kids are not the aliens, we are the aliens. Right? We are the ones who are out of step with the culture that is now in our world. So, where does all this leave us? This is a whirlwind tour of where we go here. Where does all this leave us? It leaves us that what we are doing does not connect with the majority of the population. Because the church has kept doing all the things that we did for the last 100 years, and the community has changed underneath us. And one of the responses that we do is we think, if only we do what we do better, it will work. But if you're running at 5 miles an hour and you're not connecting with people, and you decide to run at 20 miles an hour and you're not connecting with people, what happens? You get tired, but you still don't connect with people. So actually, we need a different way of doing what we're doing as church. Now, there was lots of research done in this. The Church of England is doing much more research than we did. And the 5 marks of mission are not actually ours. We nicked them from the Church of England. Right? They did them first. But they've got research called Talking Jesus. They've got research called Church in the City, Church in the Countryside, Decade of Evangelism. They did all this kind of stuff. And out of all that came the 5 marks of mission. Here they are here. All right, just have a quick look at them. So, the 5 marks of mission, believe it or not, they are doing works, right? The idea of this is they are there to help us be church in the places where we need to be church to be effective. There's nothing new in this, actually, that we have not been talking about for decades. So have you come across them before? Right, good. So let's work them out. Let's work them out a wee bit. So let's go on to the next one. Here we are. This is the changing culture, right? So, where should we practice our Christian faith? Well, you tell me, where should we practice it? Everywhere. But where do we predominantly practice our Christian faith? In church. Yes, we do. We do. If we say to people, we say, come to church, right? The idea is that we get them into the church. Well, that's actually not the idea. The idea is that we get them into the kingdom, right? The church is an outworking of the kingdom. The kingdom is not an outworking of the church. And if we get someone into the kingdom and they never cross the door of a church, well, it's their loss, but I'd rather they were in heaven for eternity than in church for an hour on a Sunday. We are terrible at having, and you'll notice I put things here called the place of teaching and the place of action. I've always believed that church should prepare you for the rest of the week. The church is not an end in itself. It's a place of preparation and training so that we can go and we can practice and put our training into effect as we live our lives. So where? Come to church, come to the coffee morning, come to the men's thing, come to the women's thing, come to the social thing. Oh yes, come to the fundraising thing, bring your wallet. But the truth of it is, the place that we truly and mostly live out our Christian faith is outside. Isn't it? Okay. There you are. Is there a big supermarket in Selkirk? You've got a Tesco, a Sainsbury's?
We've got a small co-op.
Yay! Alright. Let's imagine it's Christmas. And there's one turkey left. One turkey left, and you need that turkey.
That's the butchers.
Okay, we're in the butchers. And there's one turkey left in the butchers, and you've got family coming from Australia, and you need that turkey. And you can see, and that turkey's just over there. But there's someone over here, and you can see them, and they're also eyeing up that turkey. How far would you go to get that turkey? All right. Would you shout to catch the butcher's eye? And what's his name? Her name? Darren! Cookie! All right. Keep me the turkey! Right? And then, of course, you're doing a bring a friend to church on Sunday. And who's sitting behind you? Not Darren, but the woman that you beat to the turkey. And you're saying, welcome, we love you, but not enough to share my turkey. The place where we live out our Christian faith is actually outside the church. The church should prepare us and give us the tools to effectively live our Christian faith outside. And I don't believe it often does that. I don't think it does that. Okay? So in the church again, we do worship and we do discipleship. Outside, we're called to service. But where do we often do our service? In the church. You are going to spend your life, and the session clerks are going to spend their lives saying to people, will you go on this rota? Is that right? Yep, it really does. Session clerk or minister comes to see you, the first thing that's going through your mind is, what do they want? When they tell you I don't want anything, the second thing is, what have I done? But actually, in the church is the place of teaching. It's the place that gives us the knowledge, the confidence, the techniques, all of these things, so that we can put into practice the service throughout the week. But oftentimes, we think of the service as happening inside the church. No, it shouldn't be that way. Why? In the church, it's interesting. We don't do it because we have to do it. We do it because God is worth it. Our worship is a response to God and what we know of God. And we do it outside because we think people are worth it. And yet the irony is, and you're going to know this, man, most people think of Presbyterians as do-or-gets. They do. I am jolly got it right. Okay? Most people see church people as saying what you should not do. Or you shouldn't swear, you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't smoke, you should do. There's a whole list of things that we shouldn't do, isn't there? And they think that's what church is about. But actually what we're saying here is, no, we worship God because we respond to God's grace. It's an amazing God that we have. It's a phenomenal God that we have. And that means that worship is actually an act of celebration. Well, I've got to tell you, some church services I've been to, if that was a party, I want out. Okay? But that's what it should be like. And when, you know, I want you to look at the person next to you and tell me if they are more or less holy than you are. Okay, right. Now you know, if you walked in here with wings, or if you didn't walk in the room but you glided down the floor, you're better than us, right? But we often measure the strength of someone's faith by the amount of time that they're in church. We say someone's a good Christian if they're there every week. When I was a minister in Granton, and it's the same with Mark's, another minister sitting here now, ministers, when we write sermons, we often have people come into our heads. And we think this is a word for them. And I had this sermon, I remember this clearly, and I was thinking, oh great, this is a fantastic sermon. And it's a message for this person. And on Sunday, as I expected this person to be there, guess who wasn't there? Right? And I was gutted. And it just so happened I was meeting them that afternoon to take our respective dogs for a walk. And you know, all the while I'm sitting there going, I need to mention the fact that they weren't in church. I'm trying to, you're trying to engineer the conversation right to this. And in the end, I just said to them, no, didn't see you this morning. And they said, no, we were really tired after last night. We had folks round. And I'm thinking, well, that's just bloody typical. You know, you're socialising last night, and I'm busy putting blood and sweat and tears into this. And the next thing they said was, and it was the time that CH4 came out, they said, yeah, we had our neighbours round who don't come out, and we were singing through the hymn book till 3 in the morning. And I'm sitting there going, I feel bad now. Yeah, right? But it's just this thing, you know, how we measure it. Because actually, the measure of our Christian faith is not how we live for God in church, but it is how we live for God 24/7. You know, I mean, I laugh at Christmas time when people talk about elf on the shelf. The elf sees everything. I grew up with a Presbyterian God who knows how I think. You know, the elf's got nothing on this. But it is, the church prepares us for living in the community. And then, you know, we often think about this, you know, who's this for? We often gear everything to church attenders. But actually, about 1% of the population might go to church. And as I said, the aim is not to get church attenders. The aim is to get believers. Right? That's the thing, is to get people into the kingdom of God. And so, I have 4 pictures. How am I doing time-wise? Okay?
You have about 8 minutes.
Okay, right, 8 minutes. Right. Okay, so there's 4 pictures here, and you're going to get 2 or 3 minutes to look at them. There are 4 different styles of churches, and I want you to, just in a couple of minutes, talk to the people around your table about these 4 different pictures, because they are very, very revealing. Tell us when 2 minutes are up. Will you know more? So, your top left, what does top left say to you?
Selkirk keeps shutting the gates.
Yeah, so top left, actually, is the church and the community are separate. How many of your churches close their doors to keep the heat in when the service begins? Right, yeah, so I know, but it means that when somebody walks past, you know what buildings look most like a church? Masonic halls. And I'm going to, yeah, but it's true, because nobody has an idea what happens inside, because when you walk past, the doors are closed. And we tend to, and what that means is the club members have turned up and the club is now closed. You cannot get in. Right? What about the top right?
It still has the fence.
That's typical Church of Scotland. And the typical Church of Scotland says, come and be like us. Come and join us. But the church is still separate to the community. And we're bad at that. The bottom left is better, because if you notice, the fences are gone and the church is in the community. But what's the difference between the bottom left and the bottom right?
Church in each place.
The church is in each place, that's right. We are not looking to have a successful church. We are looking to have a successful kingdom presence. And that will actually result in a successful church. The Christian faith in every person, in every home. People have asked me, what is the purpose of the presbytery? I get asked that a lot. And my answer to them is, we have 2 purposes. The first is to see every single person in Lothian Borders come to Christian faith. That's our primary purpose. The second is to see the people of faith grow in their faith. And the rest, as far as I'm concerned, is fluff. Right? These are the 2 main things. Now, let's go on to, I reckon about 4 minutes left. We've seen those. We've got the next one. Right? So the questions that come out of the 5 marks is this. How does the church service equip you for living out the 5 marks? When you walk out the door after a Sunday morning, have you been strengthened in faith? Have you got more knowledge of faith? Have you got more opportunity? Before I was a minister, I was a painter and decorator. And when you're going through your training for that, do you know what you need? You need opportunities to put your training into practice. So how does the church service give you opportunities to put your training into practice? One of the things we used to do at Granton, our whole churches, at the end of every sermon, we had 5 minutes where I asked people to chat to each other about a question related to the sermon. The reason for that was not to see if they were paying attention. It was to give them an opportunity to hear the word Jesus on their own lips. Because actually, how will we speak to people outside the church about Jesus if we will not speak to people inside the church about Jesus? How does the teaching make you more confident in your knowledge of faith? Do you know what one of the most acceptable responses when someone asks you, why do you do something is? I don't know, but I'll find out. or I've never thought about it. Someone says to you, can you explain why God has done this? You're allowed to say, I don't know. But you should be able to give a story of how you came to faith. Where I come from, we practice something called testimony. When is the last time you gave someone your testimony of your walk with God and how God became important to you? What opportunities does the church give you to practice God? That's not filling a rota. Okay, that's fulfilling the 5 marks of mission. How does the church help you to put into practice the training and the knowledge that you receive in church? And the other question is, as leaders, because I was asking who's here, and you're all in some form of kind of leadership, how do the leaders then foster others in the church to do that? Because our job is not just to do that for ourselves, our job is actually to do that for all the people under us. So, to finish, I think I've got about 2 minutes left. All right, if you go back one, you should all have or be given a paper for today. And that paper goes through the 5 marks of mission. And it asks you things like, where am I going to put this into practice? What does this mean? Why am I doing this? When am I doing this? And who am I doing this with? And it's for you to take home and to consider carefully what that means. But it's also for the Kirk session in particular to say, if we're fulfilling our leadership responsibilities for our people, how do we do this? Right? So, I think that's my time. I've got maybe a minute for any. I've got a minute for any questions. It was a bit whirlwind, but there you go. But I was told stick to time. No? There you go. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norman. That was really entertaining as well as informative. I'm going to have to nip out for a second to put the heating back on. It only goes on for 2 hours, and you might notice that the temperature's dropped. But in the meantime, our next speakers are from Gorebridge Parish Church, Rev Mark Nicholas and Joel Nicholas, who come to tell us how their church is operating and how it's so successful. Well, welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everybody. Hello. Oh, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday. Now, big thank you to Andy for being Mr. Techman, because I recognize I sent my slide. There's just the one slide. We could tell stories for
a very long time.
We could, but it would help us to know who we've got here and what you're hoping to achieve today, and we can sort of tailor our content to what it is you're looking to do. Now, my name's Mark Nicholas. I've been minister at Gorebridge Parish Church since 1999, so that was the last millennium. And Joel happens to be my son, though he replaced our first youth minister who wasn't my son. I have a lot of sons. So that's a couple of daughters too. So which churches have we got here?
We have Selkirk Parish Church.
Selkirk Parish, yeah.
Ashkirk.
Ashkirk.
We have Ettrick and Yarrow.
Ettrick and Yarrow. Oh, so you
We
were...
have elders, we have group leaders, and we have church members. We all mixed together.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And have you done this before? Is this a first? Oh, we better not muck it up then. Why wait? Okay. So, and you weren't kidding when you said Selkirk in the valleys. Well, having lots of Welsh blood, when I see the valleys, I think different things. Would you like to start with a funny story? Yes. Okay, funny story. I was a scout with the 12th Midlothian, grew up in Dalkeith, And we used to camp just over the Ettrick on the other side. Allegedly, we did manage to get some salmon out of the Ettrick without permission, but I can't possibly say that, just in case there's a gamekeeper here. We've avoided prosecution so far. But we had the service in Ettrickbridge Parish for the Sunday, and obviously it was a colour parade, so we went there, and I was picked to carry one of the flags. And as was with the KL, I must have been about 13, 14 years old. Now, this flag had a point on the end, and as we left the church, I underestimated how much I had to dip the flag. So somewhere across the woodwork, at the front of your gallery, there is a dent, which propelled the other end of the flag in a way that meant I had to stand like John Wayne for the next 15 minutes. So it's lovely to be back. Everybody else, of course, is falling about laughing at me at the time. And one of my minister colleagues, Graham Duffin, says, funny things happen around you, Mark. And that's the truth. If it's a slow day in heaven, then I suppose things may happen. Gorebridge Parish Church, ex-mining community, now sort of commuter belt. We've got a rural wing which heads out to Temple and over to Murfoot Farm that way, for those of you farming stock. When I arrived, we were aid receiving, back when you actually had that. You knew if you were net contributor or net recipient. And I think our income that year was $29,000. In 1999, which obviously could buy a bit more, you could still get a Ford Fiesta for less than 10 grand back then. But things have changed over the last 25 years. And the stories we have to share, I thought the best thing I could do is to give you our most recent congregational photo. I think that's 2024. Yeah? I think
sounds like that, yeah.
I think so. Have a look at the babies and see if... Yeah, I think that's 2024. So, this is our congregation, very mixed congregation, and yeah, that's kind of what we look like. And that's just during the kids' talk, where every now and then we send one of the young people with a good camera phone up into the balcony to take a photo of us. And that was us on that particular Sunday at the start of the year that year. So that's it. But as you explore together as churches, what do you want? What sort of stories are you wanting to hear? Good stories.
Good, because we've got lots of bad ones.
Yeah. So I'm going to launch Joel on a story in just a moment, which is a good story. It's about a school bully, a guy called Ross. But I'm going to start out by saying this: to get mission is a wasteful activity. It consumes huge amounts of resource for an unexpected return, but the return you get on some things just blows your mind. Do we have any farmers here? Okay. I watch various, but I like watching farmers on YouTube. Partly because I appreciate farmers, because most of you, if you're a social worker or you're in business or whatever, you knew what you were going to get paid by the end of the year. And farmers haven't got a clue. They hope, but ask them how many times in the last 10 years their projection was accurate. Church is much more like that. Much, much more like that. And Jesus recognizes that in the parable of the sower, doesn't he? I mean, he talks about 4 different types of seed. The seed that lands on the path, which you think, well, that's a waste of good seed. But 50% of what he talks about is the weeds and the rocks. So that represents people who, there are people there who came to faith in Jesus Christ through us. But there's also a huge number of people who have had some meaningful interaction with the church, maybe got to the point of believing but didn't carry on as disciples. And indeed, there's people there who subsequently disappeared and others who've arrived. Are you with me? Okay. So one of the And I think instinctively we kind of know this. So I just want to start out by saying that if your churches are going to grow, and I believe that's the purpose of God for every church at all times, is that they grow, and certainly that they reseed themselves generationally. It takes resource and intent, and there will be high days and low days. Now, we're going to give you a high day story. Ross, tell us a story about Ross, Phil.
Morning.
Good morning.
So, I obviously joined my dad and my mum at this church in 1999, but I was 5. So I've grown up considerably since then. I do remember the last century, just not that much of it, and I imagine more of you remember it better than I do. But the first thing I want to say is that while I may represent a younger generation than many of you, you were all teenagers at some point in the past, yes? Or did you come out to the age of 14 and just continue on it with life? Before I tell the story, while they may have the internet and all of the stuff that comes with that now, and that's more than you had, they are going through the same stuff that you did. They're still going through betrayal and loss and fears about the future, and they don't know what to do with themselves at times. We've all experienced those things. So while I tell this story, have that in your mind. You can connect with teenagers. Trust me, you've got wisdom that they need. I've seen it happen. Okay, so back when I was in primary school, I found myself on the butt end of most of the jokes by most of the people. And growing up as a minister's son, I had a sense that I should be good, and so I tried to act that way, and my peers decided to take advantage of that and bully me. Then when I got to high school, I thought, great, I've got an opportunity to reinvent myself so that I can no longer be the kid who is just bullied all the time. Well, unfortunately, they saw right through that and decided to take advantage of me anyway. And so I was made fun of. I was told that I could and couldn't do things because I was a Christian. And then eventually a particular person called Ross, he just made my life a living hell as often as he possibly could. I avoided him as much as I could, and yet he still managed to find me standing on my own at lunchtimes. When I tell this story to my leaders, the people who lead young people with me, they often tell me to stop because I have lots of these kinds of sob stories. But our church eventually took seriously the fact that if we're going to reach young people, that we actually have to put, as my dad has said, our money where our mouth is, to put resource behind that. And it just so happened that at the time that they were praying about employing someone to do that, a young couple in their very early 20s walked into our church because they got on the right bus in the wrong direction. And we're at the end of the bus route from Edinburgh. So they ended up in Gorebridge and thought, well, we have to go to church. We'll just go into that one then. So they walk in, and then a little while later, it turns out he was studying youth ministry and he needed a placement. So our church said, well, we'll take you on for your final year of study, but we get first refusal once you've graduated. We get to work out if you can be here. And that took a lot of faith, but that's for another time. Then, this guy, his name was also Ross, he started to engage with me. I was one of about 5 teenagers in the church. Another one was my brother. So there wasn't that many of us. And he would engage with us. He would build a relationship with us. He would show us what it was like to both follow Jesus and be cool. He was great at basketball and great at chess. He was basically good at everything. It was very annoying. But it was still good because he looked at me and said, I want to hang out with you. No one had done that before for me. And then he said, my old church are running an event. It's got inflatables for adults, bouncy castles for adults. Why don't you invite someone? So I went to school and I looked at the one guy who was willing to talk to me in my class and started trying to explain it very poorly and trying to invite him very poorly. His name was Michael. Michael was busy that day, unfortunately. But then all of a sudden, from behind me, I hear someone else chirp up, oh, that sounds cool, I'll come. And I turn around, and it was Bully Ross. We'll call him Fenty for the rest of the time, not to confuse the two. And I did not want him to come. how bad of me as a Christian, right? I didn't want this other guy to come to a Christian thing. But I begrudgingly, through gritted teeth, gave him the details, thinking he won't show up. That'll be my safeguard. And then the Saturday that event happened, I showed up to where we were going to meet. My dad was going to drive us in a van. And who else showed up but Bully Ross Fenty? I was shocked. And he gets into a car with my dad, the now youth minister Ross, and me and some other guys. And we're driving off. And so we're chatting away, getting to know each other and things. And then Ross, the youth minister, turns to Fenty the bully and says, "So are you going to go out for prayer at this thing?" And he goes, "What?" He didn't know it was a Christian event. I had forgotten that detail. Whoops. We get to the place. We have loads of fun. Like so much fun. And memories were made that we still talk about today. And then we come home. And then the youth minister had set up one or two things through the week that happened regularly. And Bully Ross Fenty started attending. And then that summer, we had an event called Stage and Slam, which is a day camp. Kids come from 1 to 8 o'clock, and they come Monday to Friday. And we give them a foundational message of the gospel. This is who Jesus is, and this is what he's done for you, assuming that they know nothing before they walk through the doors. Here's the kicker. On the Friday, the last day, we were being told about the cross. What Jesus did so that we could have a relationship with God again. And I feel a tap on my shoulder. And I turn around and it's Bully Ross Fenty. And so he asks me to come outside with him. So I do. We walk outside. And then this was the first time I looked at his face. I realized there were tears streaming down from his eyes. And he said, "I am so sorry for every time I have ever bullied you." And young me did not know what to do with that. So I slapped him on the face and said, "You're fine, don't worry about it." But to this day, he's the only person who's ever done that to me. Years later, he was my best man. And that happened just nearly 3 years ago. The renewal of the church is bringing in the new generations. That's what you were at some point. You were young, I imagine, most of you in the church. You were the children. You were then the teenagers. You were then the young adults having families. And now you're just at this stage of life, most of you, as I see. If we want to see things happening, it's just repeating what we've done before, what the church has done forever. And it is happening. It's not something that's from a bygone era that we have to look back on and enjoy the memories of. It's continuing. But I realize that some of you may be coming from churches where you haven't seen it for a while, and your hope's in high demand. As Dad and I were talking on the way down, we were talking about some stories that we could share. We want to recognize that we could stand here looking like we have been successful, and it's just all fairies and rainbows and bunny rabbits running through the fields in Gorebridge. That's not the case. This very morning, I woke up and my first thought was about a whole group of young people who we have invested in blood, sweat, and tears, and they haven't shown up for 6 months. Even though through the summer this past year, we had experience after experience with them where you could see the aha moments happening behind their eyes, in their hearts and their souls about who Jesus was. And we haven't seen them, despite our best efforts. It is one of the harder realities to face, is that sometimes your best efforts with those people may come up with very little, but then the unexpected happens. When I was growing up, was not meant to be a youth minister. I was socially awkward, not that engaging, not that funny, was not good at talking to people ever, and the people who were teenagers at the time with me didn't like me. It's not really a good setup for being a youth minister. Thank you for the chuckle, I appreciate that. It's okay, I'm saying this self-aware. And yet, all of the people who I grew up with in sort of Christian areas of life, when clan gathering was happening or other events too, who were saying they want to go into ministry, almost none of them have. None of them have. And for various reasons, some fine, some strange. The reason I did is because I had someone look at me, my youth minister, look at me and say, I think you've got something. Can I invest in you? Can I disciple you? And sometimes I had the bravery to say yes. And then that meant that I'm here now. Okay. There's some stuff there, Dad. I'll probably come up in a moment, but I'll...
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Joel. So, I hope that gives you a sense of the possibility. We co-work with Jesus. The Holy Spirit's always at work in and around, in our relationships, in our families. And one of the things that we've discovered is that people are open to Jesus. Church they may have some issues with, although that's aging out because some of the younger generations, they haven't had their inoculation at a young age.
That's very true.
So
they haven't got the experiences.
No. So you might have some old data when it comes to young people in the church. So one of the things I would encourage you to do is to think about the people that God has put in your way. And I just mean in any circumstance. Let me tell you a story. It was November. It was that drizzly, yucky, gets right into your bones kind of drizzly November. And I was transferring from the manse, which is 2 doors away from the church. There's a library in between. And outside the library, this young lass was waiting. And she looked a bit sad. Now, you could get shelter from the rain, but it was cold and it was horrible. And I went up to church, had our service, and when I was coming back, I noticed she was still there. So, I didn't know this lass at all, but I stopped and I said, do you know what? I've noticed that you were waiting before I went to church, and you're here when I'm coming back from church. If you'd come with me to church, you'd have been warmer, you'd have got a welcome, and you'd have had a hot drink, you know? And she said, oh, my friends let me down. And we got to know that friend too, and that was not surprising. But that lass's name was Natasha. Natasha has had a really tough background, really, really tough, difficult family circumstances, difficult relationships, struggles with her mental health, struggles relating. But she started coming to church. It's been bumpy over the years, but I had the privilege during lockdown of taking her wedding. And indeed, her husband, who's had his struggles too, real struggles, is just secured a job on a front loader at a yard out Lone Headway because one of our dads is a truck driver for them, and this is his skill set. And they've got 2 kids now, and they're part of the church family. They remain part of the church family when the only accommodation they could get anywhere locally was in Biggar. Which, so some food parcels went a long distance. But that's just a story of engaging with just the people who are there. And having, any of your churches have the Church of Scotland welcomes you outside. Have you got one of those signs, those old blue signs? Yeah. They tend to be blue and a bit rusty now because they're a bit ancient. So, yeah. Welcome's one thing, invitation's something else. And what's the worst? Ross, our old youth minister, he used to say, just treat an invitation like you're a postman. To which I teased him and said, oh, someone with a deliverance ministry. But he said a postman. Because the posties job, when they come to your door, even those awkward manila envelopes that could be anything from a speeding fine to a power bill, right? He don't put them through your door with any sense he's got to sort out the contents of that mail. All he does, or she does, is deliver your mail. Yes? And I think there's we struggle with that. So what we try and encourage everyone to do at Gorebridge, we spent some time trying to think through, why are we here? Why are we doing what we're doing? Now, I know it says up there, here for you because of Jesus. That's our outward-facing mission statement. That's the mission statement that people in Gorebridge get to know. But the internal one is this, that we're there to encourage everyone to live in the reality of Jesus' love. And that statement of intent has meant that our members kind of know how to do things. However, it's been bumpy because we were a traditional, small Church of Scotland church with all the resistances. Okay. So, let me ask you, are you comfortable sharing your faith? Are you comfortable even nodding to say you're comfortable sharing your faith? Oh, yeah, you with me? And yet, how important is your faith in Jesus Christ in your life? So, here's the thing. People say that's Church of Scotland. Bobbins, that's not Church of Scotland. Knox is chained in a slave galley, having been involved in a plot to do away with the Archbishop of Scotland. And a French slave galley. He's looking up at what was then St. Giles, what we should really call the High Kirk if we're Presbyterian about it. And he's saying, give me Scotland or I die. Do you think he had any trouble sharing his faith? He was such a good preacher that he walked through these lands to go and preach in the north of England. And it was a toss-up as to whether he was going to minister in Scotland or England, because the word had come from the English folks he looked after in Geneva that he was an amazing preacher. Not quite the door guy then. And actually, if you look at his statue at New College, he's a charismatic, or at least a renewed Anglican. So, you've heard some stories. Do you have any questions? Or as we're sharing, is anything, what are you drawing from what we're sharing? Because we can tell stories all day. But what we're wanting to do is to give you yes, Fan.
When I came and visited you, one of the things you said to me was that when people joined, they had to offer something back.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could just talk about that a bit, because I thought that was a way of making people involved.
Right. So, there's the thing. So we've got, we don't call it a supplementary role, we call it associate membership. And the main role we call participating membership. So those are people who are actually doing something. Now, full disclosure, there are still people on the participating membership role that's kind of like, I haven't seen you in a while, or, they're on we use the Australian Aboriginal term, they're on walkabout. Because often we find people disappear for a few years and then reappear, like a Yorkshire lad who we lovingly call Nathan, who's just reappeared from Geordieland, having made some catastrophically stupid life decisions, and now he's needing some help putting his life back together, and he's found that we're still there. Who here has grown in their faith without serving? Serving is in the DNA of the kingdom of God, isn't it? What does Jesus say to his disciples? Follow me. But that following is not just believe these things, it's do these things. One of the fascinating things I like about time team, and they'll dig up a skeleton of someone and they can tell what job they had because of their bones. Or if they play fives on a weekday night. You can tell things about just because it actually affects their physiology. So being a disciple of Jesus Christ means things. It has consequences for our choices and actions and priorities. Or to use the traditional membership thing, time, talents, and financial resources. Well, so we also hope that people are going to grow, that none of us are the finished article, that God loves us as we are. Nathan's an interesting one. Would you like to hear a story about an errant Yorkshireman? I will let you describe. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can.
Thank you. So our church is invite people. The service is aimed at people who already know about Jesus, and I don't want to say, oh, we'll just do an evening one for those people, because that divides the church. It's how to have a service that is both feeding those that know Jesus and those that don't know Jesus, and that's what I'd like us to get more guidance on.
Right. So how do you do that? What's the practical stuff? Right. We spend the first 20 minutes together, which means the first 20 minutes I don't find it's probably the noisiest church you've ever been in your life. So we're all together, but we're very sincere about what we do, but we're very informal about the way we do it. We were at Gorebridge Parish Church for my grandson's baptism recently, and I was invited to take baptism, which was wonderful. But they'd had a mission week in the February week, and it was a really noisy service. I mean, not by our standards, but by Gorebridge Parish standards, and you could see there was kind of when I stood up, I said, "This is wonderful, well done. This is what it looks like, this is what it sounds like." So if there's plenty of places you can get solitude and retreat. I mean, my goodness me, you're God's own country here for that stuff. But if you're going to have a church that is family, not just a family church, but a church that functions as a family, which is what people are looking for. Single parents love us because they can find surrogate dads, granddads, mums, fix-it people, car mechanics, plumbers, brickies, whatever. Mentors for their kids when they're going a bit wild. So if church is going to be family, then that time has to be family time. So it more resembles, it's less like the opening ceremony of the General Assembly, and it more resembles Christmas dinner. Okay? Everybody gets something they want, but everybody's having to make adaptations. If you got the turkey. Right. So it's worth thinking through that. And that's a brilliant question to ask. That's a Kirk session elder level question to ask. Is if we were, by the way, she's a really important person in that conversation. Okay? If you are going to to take a step for your Sunday morning to be, to have a mission focus as well as a discipleship focus. I mean, most Church of Scotland church services I go to don't even have a discipleship real focus. It would be a homily. It gives you something to think about, a bit like a column in the Sunday Times or something like that. Then on Monday morning, the devil's got his red dot painted on your forehead and you're out in frontline battle. The church's job is to prepare people, as your Presbytery Clerk Norman was saying, for the rest of the week. Most of our church mission happens away from a Sunday, though a huge chunk of it happens on a Sunday. The other thing is we spend a long time drinking tea and coffee. And the amount of biscuits we go through is unholy. So, because that's substitute lunch, because I get home on a Sunday about 2:30. And that's with the 10:45 start. Because a lot of the pastoral stuff and catching up with people does happen on a Sunday. Have you got any thoughts?
Well, you call that, you build the relationships in the margins. I imagine even today, you'll have had a better conversation, maybe, with somebody just before this happened, and you'll maybe have a good one during lunch, and then one at the end. That's where you'll find those real moments where you're able to actually connect with folks. But I will say to that point about the service, because I come representing how you engage with the young people, you have a sort of chicken and egg kind of situation there. Because you could wait for your church to become the other extreme, an American megachurch with lights flashing everywhere and people descending on trapezes. That would be epic, that would be incredible. Let me know when you're doing that. But I've just come to watch. But you could be waiting forever for that version of it to happen. So why not just invite them now and kind of do it together? Because you may end up with somebody that you invite who's maybe one of those people that has had experience somewhere else. They're just a bit disillusioned, but they're creative, or they're conscientious and they've got a focus of engineering or something that they can sit there. Oh, our tech guy, who wasn't our first tech guy, is a blustery, bad-mouthed, runs at 1,000,000 miles an hour, drinks 3 shots of coffee at a time kind of guy. And he's just a little bit older than me, though you wouldn't have guessed. But he made sure that when COVID hit, that we weren't just sitting with a webcam. He was like, we need to make this happen. We need to make this happen and make it good, or as good as we can possibly do. And he nailed it. Like, absolutely. Stuff that I couldn't have even thought of. He went for it. But if we treated him with the sort of like, well, your behavior is just a bit off, so you're not as good at here, the character stuff could do with some refining. If we treated him as such, then we wouldn't have had that in the midst of us.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you're gonna wait for your church service to be perfect before you start inviting people, I'd suggest you're just gonna wait for eternity. But if you start inviting people now, you're the one who they're interested in, not the church service. You're the one, because you're the one building a relationship with them. They're going to trust you. And when something happens in your service that they're a bit like, what's happening there? Hopefully you're the one they turn to. And you're the one who's able to help interface there. Not to apologize necessarily and go, well, you know, our minister is just a bit off today, or, you know, they're just probably a bit grumpy. The negative stuff. And say, well, you know, actually, yeah, you're right. We have been thinking about that thing. We're not sure necessarily what would you do if you just had full reign of that? And then listen. And they might be shocked that somebody in the church is listening to somebody outside of the church. Not because they need to tell us who Jesus is, we know that. But maybe for the other stuff, the practical things, or at least the creative things.
There's one of the... are you all involved in link charges or unions or places with multiple worship? Yeah. Right, so when I said about starting at 10:45 and leaving at 2:30, immediately in your head said, well, we can't do that. And I hear you. But that time of fellowship where you actually spend time together, that really, really helps. Because it's, if you arrive at church, you know, during the introit, if you still have one of those, and leave after a threefold Amen, you're not going to build those relationships with each other, let alone the people that you're hoping to draw into the wider church family. One of the things we've taken a reasonable amount of inspiration from is the Roman Catholic approach of evangelization, as opposed to just evangelism. Evangelism is where I say, you know, do you know that Jesus loves you, and he died for you, and he has a plan and purpose for your life? And that's important. But evangelization is the idea that the life of the church family, you tuck people into that. You come round for a coffee, go round to see them after they're bereaved, you know, help them fix their car, whatever it may be. Lend them a harrow or whatever, if you're in the farming community. I mean, farmers do this all the time. The other thing to say is that we needed to build a church that was suitable for Gorebridge and Temple, but suitable for sort of where they were going, not just for where they were. Everybody who thought church was a good idea and was prepared to act on that instinct was already in church. And those were the group of people who then had to think through, well, how do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do? Ask the question. Don't just take it, think about this. And of course, you know, again, farming is quite helpful here, because if you're not making a yield on a crop, change the darn crop, you know? If oilseed rape is succumbing to the cabbage beetle or whatever it is that's been decimating, then grow something else. And if that doesn't work, grow something else. There's an intentionality about church, and this is one of the reasons that Jesus uses in terms of mission those agricultural metaphors. I did say, so Nathan Broadbent. Nathan was as hard as nails. He had a heart attack in his 20s. He'd done his cartilage playing very rough football in his late teens. He was born on a forces base in West Germany. And it probably wasn't just West Germany, Nathan. Or was it? Well, maybe not. Maybe it was just Germany by then. But he was in, his dad was very abusive, forces background. But really he was from Bradford. And he arrived like a whirlwind in our church. And we invited him to Alpha. Now, we run Alpha as our programmatic evangelism, okay? Sometimes our Alphas are big. Sometimes we try and not tell the guests that there's only 2 guests left. And there's a team of about 20. But we look after them, and he came through Alpha. And we'd had our Alpha day, and he came up to me that Sunday and he said, when I first came here, I were an atheist. Now I get goosebumps in worship, right? So That's Nathan. He just calls it like he sees it. He took a photograph, by the way, of someone had communicated with him on Sunday and said, what are you doing this morning? And he says, I'm at church. And then he took a photograph of his communion cup and his bit of bread. He says, look, they're giving out free shots. So, some of the elders that I first served with would have, I figured out I was less than half the average age of the elders when I first got to Gorebridge Parish. So it was all of the everything that you're imagining.
And it's worth saying that I'm a year older than you were when you started it.
Yeah. So, oh man, I was so green.
If that helps as a visual.
And to be fair, the church's fear was that I'd experiment on them and then abandon Frankenstein halfway through the reconstruction. So it was, sticking around really helps. And I know Kwame's new here, but you'd be thinking about, well, let's muck in. Let's go for the long haul here. Because that's probably the predominant way you see fruit, is to muck in and stick at it. So part of Alpha is you have a healing evening, and Nathan's knees were so bad he walked with a stick. I mean, he looked late 30s. He didn't look anything like in his 20s, and still tough paper around nonetheless. And we did the healing night. We prayed for his knees, and then it get fixed. Now, you know those bits in the New Testament where Jesus prays for people who are sick. Okay? So right, well, we'll go after this. And I thought, well, what's the situation that the Holy Spirit couldn't resist? And I hadn't got any inspiration for what you might call the children's address, but the kids' talk, we tend to call it. So I thought, I know what I'll do. So I stood up the front and I said, look, anybody here got anything wrong with them? You can imagine, this is a church full of largely Scottish, we're probably the largest minority of the Scots, right? And I said, anybody want to get prayer? And nobody volunteered, which I was kind of hoping for. And I said, and up the back with his stick is Nathan. I said, Nathan, why don't you come down? He's like, oh. He's a wiry lad. And he picks up his stick and he limps his way down. And he sort of looks up at me and says, it's not going to work, right? And he sits down in the chair, and I get the children to come around. I said, right, and I explain, Jesus prayed for people who are sick, and we're going to pray for Nathan. We can't do anything. We can't repair his knees, but the Lord knows what to do with a new pair of knees. He walked away from there 10 minutes later without a stick. Now, and he still hadn't got a stick, right? Even though he's, now, it's okay to take risks. You might not want to take that risk. But it's okay to take risks. When we've had situations where we pray for people who are not well, and they've still been not well, but they've been blessed because they were cared for. But to take risks, to use what God has given us, the same Spirit that indwells us that indwelt Jesus. Because he sent the Spirit so that we could do, he said in John's Gospel, greater things. And, so there's a story about Nathan. He's good for a story, isn't he? I was sitting with one of our elders who was a Baptist, and Thursday night, and the question had come up. We were doing a Bible study based on an episode of a series called The Chosen, and it said, when the Pharisees accused Jesus of eating with tax collectors and sinners. I said, when have you, as someone who loves Jesus, been the person in your life who has reached out to you? And when have you been that person who's been reached out? And I looked at Brian, and Brian he was shaking his head. I said, I bet you've got a dozen names there. He says, I have, but I'm thinking about Nathan. So there you go. And actually, Nathan isn't in that photograph, though he was in the previous congregational photograph. Yeah. Any other questions? How are we doing for time as well?
Got about 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Oh,
fix the world in that time.
Absolutely. Yes, David.
I think I've been in Selkirk Parish Church for a long time, and it's changed, and it is very much, I know Louise's question, it's not perfect, but certainly it has a good family feel. People come because they like being there.
Brilliant.
And that's good. And we've seen various new people arrive, just not because any one of us has invited them. So the Spirit's at work. And then I'm thinking about what you're describing there, which is a church with that same kind of feel and vibrancy. And then I'm thinking about what Norman was saying about, but actually most of our community lives in a virtual social media world.
Yeah.
So no matter what we do, there's always just going to be a minority of people who are going to want to meet physically. How much of what you're doing is in that virtual world rather than in the physical world of groups meeting together?
It's a great question. So, less than your question may imply or guess that we do. So I am not good at social media, so I punt that off to my colleague Abigail, who's much better at it than I am. When COVID hit, because we all had to go through that experience of being forced into that digital space, we did our youth work online. We ran groups at the same times we would do normally. We just did them over Zoom and Discord and various other platforms. We did Instagram stories to try and engage with our young people. We did loads of things in that space. But when we reopened the doors, that's when they came back. Whereas the virtual, we had probably maybe 10% of our kids needed that virtual space because they were in homes that were desperately difficult. And they were now forced to stay in those environments. They couldn't just leave and go outside and meet with their mates like they were used to doing. And so they used our spaces like a lifeline. So I hold no regrets about that. But I was sad that some of our kids just disappeared off the face of the earth. But again, when we reopened, they came back in droves. So I'm not saying ignore the virtual, but and absolutely use it. If you've got some people who are into that kind of thing, go for it. Absolutely. Be the delivery man. Throw those invitations wherever you can. Absolutely. But if I've learned anything about youth ministry and then ministry as a whole and then life, it's that people are looking for connections that are authentically true and honest and real. That's what they want. They want to actually know that you care about them, that you'll listen to them, that you'll cry with them and laugh with them and enjoy memories together that you can think about later on in life. Our young people are exactly the same. And in fact, you mentioned this earlier, Dad, but the generation that we're dealing with currently are less scientifically minded and objective than my generation was. They're looking for real connections with folks. It's fascinating. And it has meant that they're more interested in faith than previous generations before them. The problem is that they're interested in everything. So we have to try and funnel them towards Jesus, as opposed, I have a young person who's just finished high school this past summer, and she said that she wants to go to study religion so that she can decide which religion she wants to be a part of. And I thought, I can really save you some time. Please, let me.
Yeah. We do live stream on YouTube.
Yes.
That was an artifact we probably wouldn't, we would have probably got around to it, but it's hard work live streaming on YouTube. For any of you who are involved in live streaming, it takes a team of at least 5. It means that we've got some cracking jobs for, largely guys, has to be said. That one does fall along sex boundaries quite carefully. But I think we've failed to get a live stream out once in the 5 years that we've been doing, 6 years now, I think. So but that's quite the task. And you can watch online, our live stream's not very, we haven't chosen to focus on that as our primary means. They get about 100 views initially, and then that will build to 150, 200 over the course of the year. It does mean that people have got kids at sports or people who are away. I mean, we've got one of our elders has a boat, and so they'll watch our service from afar, so we get some fascinating stories. It also means that the church in the world where there's persecution, we have some in Southeast Asia, some in Iran, If you don't know this, you ought to. The fastest growing church at the moment is the Iranian Evangelical Church. Okay? We've got lots of Nigerians, so there's a bit of traffic there as well, because in the north of Nigeria, over half the Christians that are killed each year for their faith will be killed in northern Nigeria. So that helps for that, but it's not a primary focus for us, because ultimately we need Jesus with skin on. We need to interact with people on a one-to-one basis. And church should be, it was intended to be as local as is humanly possible. I mean, that's why Gorebridge Parish Church, it's like, that's what we are. It was a three-way union in 75, a union which was a cut and shut. It was an arranged marriage, and there was a lot of saltiness towards Dalkeith Presbytery. But it's 50 years ago this year, we'll celebrate that. But the online stuff, it's there, but actually one of the key things that we have is the ability to sit with someone. But it's the sort of thing what attracts you to go to a place? People? Decent coffee?
Yes, please.
How good's your coffee? Good. Now, if you've got good coffee, yeah, toilets. Well, you're talking about Ricky Fulton. Ricky Fulton was interviewed by Life and Work, and he said, what does the Church of Scotland need? He said, more and better toilets. Now, we all laughed at it, but I reflected on the fact that the toilet at my local church then, Cranston, you could pass an expensive block of cheese under the door. It was not heated. And in the dingy far end of where the toilet was, and it was one of those toilets that put you off thinking you needed the loo at all, were somewhere in the region of 20 broken Bakelite hoovers, which were butchered for parts to keep the one that the church used going. And they were Bakelite. This was in the 80s. We knew by then that Bakelite was flammable and all sorts of awful things. How obviously didn't tell the Church of Scotland insurers that we were keeping up. So to actually think through, if you were to say to a friend of yours who doesn't, atheists are sometimes up for this, if you've got an atheist friend, bless them, right? You're not going to get the faith thing. I'm pretty sure of that. Okay? But, because even Dawkins has started going to church. So, I'm a cultural Christian, he will say. He's regretting saying that out loud now, because people are holding him to it. But just say, could you come with me one Sunday and just give me your honest reflection? Let me know what it's like going through the door. What do you notice? What do you experience? What do you see? What do you actually see? Because many of us have been part of our congregations for so long, we're like the smoker who doesn't know that the world doesn't smell of smoke. We're just, does that help? Does that help? And
so, just to say, don't want to disregard the question, which sounds like, should we consider the virtual space? Is that fair? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But if that's not your skill set, fine. That's great. If you have grandkids, maybe they will be. Odds are they are. Because they do live that space. Even different to me. The kids all have Chromebooks now at school, at least up where we are. I didn't. Not even close. We had one computer in our school, and we were just starting to get into that kind of stuff. So, yeah, give it a try. If you need someone else to help you with it, go for it.
Yeah. Some of our children's friends have been a key source of mission for us. And I'm looking at wee Joey, who was having he came back from school with our youngest son in order that he could go to the youth thing that we're running at the church. When we had young people who had to lie to their parents about what they were doing on the Sunday in order for them to get to church. In one case, that was, in Scott Duncanson's case, his parents were members. and they were dissuading him from going. So it was a rebellious thing for Scott to do, to come to church.
I just remembered there was some research done into the generation that's currently coming through about their feelings towards church. And this phrase helped me so much with what I'm encountering. They called it warm apathy. I think it's great, they say, that you have faith. I think that's wonderful, actually. I just don't see how it's relevant for me. My life's fine enough. Like I have enough of what I need. I get depressed and anxious sometimes, but I kind of get by. I have a good laugh, and things are okay. And obviously, we're hearing that, going, yes, but what are the eternal consequences of that? you could have life and life to the fullest. It's you don't know what's behind the door yet. But that helped me a lot. Because then you are in a conversation that says something like, have you ever experienced a sense of awe when the sun's rising behind the hills? They go, yeah. And like, I wonder where that comes from. Why do we have that? And then you just see where that goes. Because you're not, they might come up with some spiritualist answer, fine, but you get to define it in the conversation and say, well, I think God put that there for us. I think that He gave us that part of ourselves. And I think sometimes that reminds me how much He loves me. That might be later, but do you see what we're doing there? We're starting to invite the conversation towards that area of things instead of just saying, what's your thoughts about Jesus? Because they may just have no interest. And they just don't care. It's not that they dislike it or are hostile. They just don't care as much. But they will care if you care about them.
Now, I'm looking at our time. The last thing I want to say is this. What's being built at Gorebridge is being built with very ordinary, very broken people. Sometimes very unlikely people. Hand on heart, and I'd say this to their face, but many of the students that Joel's taken on to grow into youth ministry people, I didn't think there was a snowball in perdition's chance of them coming through. And yet, actually, as they grow, you see that with the disciples. I mean, how did Peter, the fisherman from Galilee, whose accent gave him away, how did he end up leading the church in Jerusalem? I mean, it's just extraordinary. He's sharing about the kingdom of God to members of the Sanhedrin or to Pharisees, to people who in the ordinary order of things would be far more expert than him. People are desperate for an experience of God. They long, many of our neighbors, friends are spiritually orphans. They don't think they have a heavenly Father. In fact, the good news, if you introduce it to them, is such good news they have trouble believing it's true. Life for our forebears was much tougher than for us in so many ways. It was much more subsistence in terms of food. We are 7 times wealthier than our great-grandparents. I mean, we are fabulously wealthy, though we don't often feel it in comparison to them. But they had a richness of spiritual life that sometimes beggars belief. That as they ploughed, they'd recite the Psalms. That they would cross-stitch a proverb for a wedding. That they would be praying over the birth of a child because they knew it was perilous. If there was an illness that came through. I remember reading there was a presbytery of Lewis and they called for fasting and prayer because there had been a bovine infection. And that was their first recourse. We need to pray this through. That's in our DNA as a nation. And everything from one level at that to Wilberforce, taking year on year for the abolition of slavery. My great-grandfather was a congregational minister in Attrick in Sheffield, and that church shut to become a carpet factory and then in suspicious circumstances burnt down. Next to that is a graveyard where one of the founders of the abolition movement, a remarkable lady, is buried. That's there for us. We get to stand on their shoulders. And our task is to pass that on to the next generations. Last thought. Many of our generation who rejected faith when they were younger have figured out that the solutions that they came to have not worked. Okay? They've been through the divorces. They've been through the ups and downs. They've surrounded their life with as many possessions and successes as they can, and they're now at a stage of life where they're going, oh, that really did not work out the way I expected. And if we're humble enough, they're a mission field if we say, do you know what? I'm sat out looking down the road for the prodigals to return, and that we're ready to do so when they do. The Lord bless you in Selkirk and here in Ettrickbridge, all up the Yarrow Valley. My goodness me, I've got such fond memories of being here. Though I think there's someone here that our Ettrick might have thrown stones at when we were camping. I apologize. I apologize for sins committed years ago. But what an amazing opportunity you've got today. And thank you so much, Kwame, for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your being here. And we are going to stick around a bit so you can bend our ear in private if should you need to. Okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
May I